it's overwhelming, but it's also our jobs.
Our job is only going to get harder.
It's worrisome.
This is something that's unprecedented.
Now is not the time to be a cowboy. No one has anything to prove. We're all in this together.
Welcome to reporting from the frontline of the pandemic. I'm Victoria Gonzalez, and I'm here with Paola Tristan Arruda, a reporter from Live 5 News in Charleston, South Carolina. So thank you, Paola, for joining me today.
Thank you.
And so my first question for you is just how have you had to adjust the way that you work in such a critical time?
Well, I think it started about 2 weeks ago when we were told that we weren't allowed to come back to the station at all. So we've basically been working out of our cars and our homes. I've been taking our work car home. It has all of my equipment in it, my laptop and stuff. So I think the biggest adjustment for me, especially being night side, is that I'm usually back in studio. I go live in studio a lot. So now I've been having to adjust and basically either I'm live every night or I, shoot a look live, making sure that I look like I'm live, but I'm not. But it's been a big adjustment because not going to the news station means that you're carrying everything you need with you at all times.
So you're on your own for your shoots?
Yeah. And so that's the thing. I'm an MMJ, so I'm shooting everything myself anyway. So that hasn't really changed because I've always shot and edited everything myself, but it does give me a little added stress when sometimes it doesn't make sense to go live at 11 o'clock because it's dark. You can't see anything behind you. So I usually am in studio because it makes more sense. But now that I can't do that, I have to figure out, okay, what's the best way for me to, make my 11 o'clock shot, but still be safe at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And how are you keeping safe out on the street when you have to do these shoots?
So one thing that we have, we've transitioned is we usually have our lavs that we stick on a person. Instead of that, we were told to just use our stick mics. So then I just use a stick mic for the person. I wipe it down after every use. And I do the same thing for my camera and all the equipment. Some of us, I haven't been able to get one yet, but some of us have little podiums where we just put the mic on the podium so we can just step back from the person.
Okay.
And then the other way that we're doing it is trying to do Facebook or Skype interviews as much as we can. A lot of, I cover a lot of city council meetings, things like that. Everything is now online because of this. Everything is live streamed. So after the meetings, I try to just do a FaceTime with the mayor or something instead of meeting them in person because those also tend to be older people. So I rather not put them in harm's way by just doing a FaceTime interview instead.
And what about your station or your network? How have they dealt with covering the news?
So it's been really hectic. Everything is COVID-19. It almost feels like if it's not COVID-19, it doesn't lead a newscast. It's different because we've also been on a different schedule for producers. Basically, we have one or two people at the station. Everyone else is working remote. Everyone else is working from home. Our producers are still stacking shows and writing shows from their house, and they've been rotating two producers that will come in and booth all the shows. So they're the ones that are physically in the control room, but they're doing basically all of our newscasts from inside the building while everyone else is working from home. And then it'll rotate, and next week there will be two other producers in studio. So we're minimizing the contact by, making sure there's only one or two people at the station. Same with our anchors. We have one of our anchors at the desk, and we have one of our anchors anchoring from home. So we're, still doing our social distancing, making sure we run everything smoothly, but actually minimizing the number of people that are at the station.
All right. And I was also wondering, how are you finding your stories? How are you able to find sources and people that are willing to stop to talk to you?
So it's been very different in the sense of, I can't just call up anyone anymore because a lot of offices are closed. So there have been a lot of meetings. That's actually been very helpful for me night side. There's an emergency meeting almost every day with like one of the cities, one of the towns, because they're always passing emergency ordinances. For businesses, you know, a lot of them are doing takeout. So I've done stories with businesses that are still open. I kind of just go in, or if we've done a story with them in the past, I just call them up. But as far as getting real people out on the street, that's definitely been more difficult. So I feel like we've been a little bit more flexible with like who we can get. Sometimes I will have people out on the streets and I'll just go up to them and I'll do the same thing. Like I have my stick mic, I'll wipe it down after every use. And I haven't had a problem so far trying to find like just your average everyday person, because there will still be someone out on the street. But for officials, I try my best to like call them and just FaceTime them ahead of time.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people might not want to have that contact being close and stuff. So
yeah, and like there's places that are certain islands, because we live on the coast, so it's, you know, there's beaches all around us. So there's different islands that basically have closed down or like shut access off to tourists or anyone that doesn't live on that island. I think it doesn't really apply to the media, but I'm like, I'm not going to take my chances and go to the island for them to tell me to turn back. So I'm just going to call and be like, hey, can you do a FaceTime interview?
are there any more precautions that your station has taken that they've never taken before?
So I'm trying to think. I know it's the whole you know, wiping everything down. They have like different hand sanitizers, and like they're ordering stuff in bulk for us to have in our cars. The podiums for like the microphones, which I don't think we've ever had before. So they're ordering podiums so we can distance ourselves from people, making sure that you're not at the station. Like it's one of those things where, you know, some managers will come in. Mostly everyone's working from home, and I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. Literally not a single person, only two people being at the station at a time. That's something that I don't think we've ever been able to do. And one of our anchors just went live yesterday from his house, and he was saying, like, you know, in all of his years living, he's never seen anything like this. So I think this is like a very new step for everyone. I think the other thing is making sure that you're not coming in when you're sick. I think for us as journalists especially, we're told, you know, we kind of just go with everything. Even when we're sick, sometimes we come in. But in this case, they're really, you know, adamant about, like, if you're sick, do not come in, do not work. Sometimes you can still work from home because, you know, especially if all your interviews are online or FaceTime. But my station, at least, or my company, Gray, is doing something where instead of taking like paid time off, they're giving us special time off if anyone does end up getting the coronavirus. So I think a lot of times that's a big problem for people. Like, hey, I don't want to take my personal time off, you know, because I'm sick. Like, I don't want to take my vacation time or something like that. So they like have a special paid time off for people who have the coronavirus to make sure that people are staying home and staying healthy.
Yeah, it's definitely a first for the entire world, basically. So, but I'm glad that they're doing what they need to do to keep everybody safe.
Mm-hmm. I think too, one of the biggest things about stories that I've just thought of is a lot. There's stuff that's happening all over the country, but I think a lot of it is happening. It's the same thing in every city. So I think it's like a really interesting way of like being unified. So I think you can look at any market and see what they're doing and implement it in your own town, which you can do that for some stories, but not everything. But I feel like you can do so more with the coronavirus because they're making, you know, every state kind of is having similar precautions. And so you can look at what someone, even though I live in Charleston, I can look at a story that someone's doing in LA and see how I can do that here. So I think that's also a really interesting way of finding stories.
Yeah, because it's everywhere. So,
yeah.
So what has surprised you the most about your coverage?
I think it's been kind of lenient in the sense that, you know, we have like a restriction, like we can't just do one interview stories anymore. Or we had these restrictions prior to the coronavirus. And now I feel like we've been a little bit more lenient. We've been able to do something that's a little bit more featurey because my station's known for very hard news. It's hard for a reporter to get to do a feature story. But because everything has some kind of like hard impact in a way. Even if you're doing a story about like churches passing out, food to children, usually, we wouldn't have a reporter on that story. We can because it like all relates back to the coronavirus. So I think that's kind of what surprised me the most. And honestly, it's the backlash too has surprised me the most. I mean, the media already has, or like news stations, we have a lot of backlash, in general. But I think with the coronavirus, we have like this new level of people that are very distrustful of what we do. But at the same time, we are getting a lot of messages from people that are like, thank you for keeping us updated during this time. Because, a lot of us non-essential businesses have closed down and, news hasn't. So you think about like, you have your first responders, your nurses, people that are open, and you have us that, are keeping you informed what's going on. So we're putting our lives kind of like out on the line just like anyone else. So it's very interesting because like my job has always been important, but I feel like it's even more important during this time.
That's a really good point. Would you say that has been the hardest part about covering this pandemic, or what would be?
Yeah, I think it's two things. I think it's that. It's kind of like, how do we keep, everything relevant without, blowing it out of proportion or, not talking about it enough? How do you have like that balance? And then the other part I think is like, we also are trying to stay safe. So I'm not necessarily super nervous for myself going out and talking to people, but even if I'm healthy, I could still spread it to someone else. So I am trying to minimize like contacts by doing the FaceTime interviews, but sometimes you still have to report in person, especially for me, since I'm a night side reporter. I'm the only one we have. So when breaking news happens, I still have to go out and report on breaking news. So like, who knows how many people I've come into contact with. So I think it's also like, I'm doing my best, wiping down everything, but you also just never know. So I think that's also kind of a scary part of it.
That's actually really, when you think about it, it is scary, but at least you're doing it to keep people informed, and it's definitely worth it at the end to risk it.
Exactly. Sure. I don't have too many like concerns that I'm going to catch it, and if I do, like I know enough about it now that I kind of know what to do.
Exactly. You have the knowledge that you need to keep yourself safe, which is important.
Exactly.
And what other changes are you expecting in the newsroom and in your coverage in the upcoming weeks?
So I'm trying to figure out, what else is going to come after this. We have a bunch of stay-at-home ordinances right now. A lot of people are looking to the governor to issue like a statewide stay-at-home ordinance or stay-at-home order. So I'm kind of interested to see like where we go from here. Like, are we gonna get this, major lockdown that people are expecting, or is it just gonna stay like this until we open everything back up? And looking to like, okay, what's gonna be, when are we gonna find out how much impact this has had on our businesses and our like local economy? So I'm kind of just waiting for that. As far as changes that we've made or like we could make, we basically like have everyone out of the newsroom, so I don't even think we can make any more changes unless we strictly do only FaceTime or Skype interviews. I think that's the one thing that I'm kind of looking for. Like, it kind of doesn't make sense if you think about it, because some of it we're still doing out in the field, some of it we're doing FaceTime. So I'm like, I wonder if they're going to transition to only doing video interviews. So that's something that could be a possibility, but I'm still kind of like waiting to see what they're going to say about that.
Yeah, it's hard to tell what the time frame will be, if things will get better, if things are going to get worse. So I guess we just have to wait and see.
Exactly. We have a huge like elderly population too in Charleston. So I can see them, closing everything down. But right now our governor hasn't really said, that he's going to do that. So we're kind of just waiting to see. But I mean, we have a Trump presser every day, so it's like anything can change in a matter of minutes. And I think that's the other thing. We just got an email from our news director this morning, who she like sent out a list of things that we should be doing, just like regular things that we've known about keeping ourselves safe. But she said, you guys, if you're working remotely, you should be working remotely like from home, like in the Charleston area, nowhere else, because if anything changes and we have to go back to the station, we have to be prepared for that. So I think it's also being prepared that like we also could go back to the station at any time if something changes.
Mm-hmm. So this is more of like a personal question. How are you dealing with the stress yourself? Like when you get home, how do you balance work and home during this time?
So this is like very different because I feel like I should be a little bit more relaxed since I'm working from home, but I feel like I'm not. I feel like I'm checking my phone like every 5 seconds. Like from the moment I wake up, like this morning I woke up at 9:30 and I was already checking my work phone. And I don't come in until 2:30. That's something that's a struggle for anyone during any time. Balancing personal life and work life is very hard in general. So I think that because we're also working from home, it's hard to take like the work out of it because you're physically at home working. So it's like not that balance of like, oh, I'm at work working and now I'm at home relaxing. So it's definitely been a little harder to give myself a break. But I think that it's just looking forward to the weekends. Like I put my phone down during the weekends, make sure everything is turned off. I don't look at it. I just went on like a mini vacation a couple days ago, which was hard, obviously, because literally we're in the middle of a pandemic, and the coronavirus is all that anyone's talking about. So it's hard for you to get away from it, even if I'm away, because people are still talking about it. I think in this time it's important, like, just like when you're entering any kind of job to, have some hobbies, some things that you're doing. Like for my breaks, I try to at least go out for a walk or something to just clear my mind and also stay active because everything's closed down. You can't really go anywhere or do anything. So I'm trying to like, at least when I find the time, just like go outside, like leave my phone at home, go for a walk. So I think that's been kind of helping me during this time. Again, I'm not super worried for myself. I'm more worried for other people. We also have older reporters that are out on the field, and I'm like nervous for them because I'm like, you shouldn't even be out here. So it's more a worry for everyone else. But I think it helps to know that we're kind of all in this together.
Yeah, and it definitely is harder to separate work from home when you're a reporter. Like you were saying, your news director said, even if you're working from home, you don't know what's going to change, if you're going to have to go back to the station, if you're going to have to go out for breaking news. So it's definitely harder, I imagine, for reporters to be able to balance that out.
Yeah, I mean, there's some days like on Wednesday, I shot all of my interviews for my story yesterday, like in advance. So yesterday was super easy for me. I was literally like just like from home. I was able to put everything together. Like I didn't even have to really like leave my house ever. So it was really nice because it was just kind of like, oh, I can work at my own pace. Like I'm literally in PJs right now and I don't care. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of nice to have that because you would not be able to do that any other time. But again, like if that's all that you're ever doing, there's really no break for you.
Yeah, you never really know what's going to change. And what's your advice to anybody wanting to go into broadcast journalism?
So one of the biggest things, honestly, the biggest struggle, which I wish like I was taught this in school, like we get taught a lot of stuff, but the one thing that I was never really taught is how to pitch stories. That is going to be the hardest part of your job, no matter what. I think it's important now to start looking at, especially when you start looking at like where you want to go for jobs, it's important to join Facebook groups. It's important to start like looking at different cities and towns and look at their like council agendas. If you're moving somewhere, you want to start calling people as soon as possible and like getting connections that way, and like even being like, hey, I'm new here. Just letting you know I'm going to be calling you once in a while to check in. I think building sources is another thing that no one's really like teaches you. Because because we get taught, so much how to actually do the stories, but it's the before, like the how do you actually get those stories in the first place. It's really hard, and that's going to be a hard, wherever you go, or even if you're in your second and third job, it's kind of hard, finding stories every day. But I think having just like a good background of, these are some Facebook groups, these are city council members, these are agendas, and, these are the list of like people that I can call regularly. That's going to be really, really important when, wherever you go. That's kind of my biggest advice, is like start to look at that, ahead of time, because I kind of was like thrown into it. So when I moved, I was like, what is this? Like, I don't know how to look for stories. It was very, very hard for me. It still is. In this like pandemic, it's different too, because I'm not calling people. I'm not really like looking at meeting agendas. So it is a little weird in that sense, but definitely start looking at how you're going to pitch your stories ahead of time. Know that, especially at your first job, it's going to be very demanding, and you're going to have a tough time with it. Everyone always says like your first job, because I'm currently in my first job, is very stressful, but remembering why you're doing it in the first place, like remembering that, why you love journalism and what you're trying to accomplish when you tell your stories. And I think that will really help you get through the tough times. And I think with that, knowing that there's going to be really tough times, journalism is like a roller coaster. You have like your really good days and your really bad days, but just because you're in your bad days doesn't mean that that's where it's going to stay. Yeah, just kind of advice like that. Like you kind of hear it from other people until you're actually in it, and you're like, wow, they, really meant it. I've never heard anyone talk to me about really like how to pitch stories. And that's what I wish people, talked to me about before I came here. So that's why I really want to stress, like, if you know any kind of reporter anywhere, and you want to like ask them how they've been finding stories, like I would highly recommend doing that, because that's going to just like help you in the long run.
That's really useful advice, because you're right, we usually don't focus too much on how to do that in school. So most of your stories, do you get assigned them, or you have pitched most of them?
Yeah, I pitch most of them. You're expected to pitch your stories, and once in a while you will get assigned something. It's double ways. Like sometimes they just didn't like your pitch and they give you something, and sometimes they're like, oh, these are good, but like we already want you to work on this. So that happens sometimes, but for the majority of the times, you're going to want to come in with some pitches. What I've learned is sometimes it's also in the way you pitch it. You can't just be like, I'm planning on talking to, people about this. Like you have to be specific in like what you want. Just being like, this is what I'm trying to talk about. This is why people care. This is kind of the video that I want to get. And these are the people that I'm going to talk to. If you kind of frame it in the way like, this is what I'm doing, and these are the people I'm going to talk to, they're more likely to accept your pitch. And setting up things in advance as much as you can. Like, on Wednesday, I kind of thought of my story for Thursday, and I ended up, you don't have to necessarily film things beforehand. I just had some time, so I ended up doing that. But sometimes just having your interviews set up ahead of time will help you out in the long run. Doesn't necessarily mean like not every day you can set something up, especially nightside is so hard because I don't have enough time during the day to call people. And by the time I do, it's already like 5, 6 o'clock, and like people have gotten home for the day. So just trying, look at like your email. Sometimes people will send tips in. Tips are really helpful. Sometimes they're nothing, but sometimes they'll be like, oh, this is happening, and you can just email everyone back and be like, oh, I'm going to look into this. And you can reach out to that person and set that up later in the week, and that will help you out a lot. So I think just keeping your eyes open to see like what you can do for the rest of the week. Nightside, there's a lot of meetings that happen. So sometimes it's kind of easier for me in the sense of sometimes there's really important meetings happen and I can just do that and I know I'll do that and it'll be fine. But also I'm the only nightside reporter, which means I always have to have the lead story, which can, be very difficult, especially when you were thinking of doing something and then Dayside does it and you're like, okay, well, what do I do now? Like, there's nothing else to do. So again, some days will be harder than others, but if you can try to look for things ahead of time, you'll help yourself out so much.
But has it been easier for you to pitch things during this pandemic since there's so much happening?
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to think of what I did this week, but I wasn't here on Monday or Tuesday, but Wednesday there was a meeting about one of the islands. They were going to pass this emergency ordinance to stop short-term rentals. And I was like, okay, I'll just do that because that happens at 5:00. I'm like, that's perfect. And then we had someone reach out to us about, what's happening with the homeless during all of this. They're not really being talked about and they're very vulnerable when it comes to the coronavirus. And I was like, you're right. So this guy reached out to us and I met him while he was passing out food and passing out hygiene products. Talked to him, talked to someone that was living on the streets, and then talked to an organization that was we're doing the best we can, but we've had to cut resources. And so I was like, perfect. So that was my story yesterday. And today there's another meeting with a different town, and they're trying to talk about putting a stay-at-home ordinance. But also what's interesting is that it's a whole mess. There's so much drama in this town because the mayor and the council members don't really get along. And apparently the town council members want to get rid of these emergency ordinances, which is crazy because we're in a pandemic. But they're going to talk about that. Apparently city council or town council is trying to get rid of these ordinances and the mayor's can't get rid of these ordinances. So that's happening at 3:00. And I was like, okay. So I woke up and I knew that was happening. I was like, hey, I'm just going to do this today if you guys are fine with it. And they were like, yeah. So it's been a little easier in that sense. There's always something happening, either a meeting or people passing out food or, a lot of places closing or a new coronavirus case. So it's been a little easier to, think of stories. I think what's really going to be hard is the week after when things are starting to die down. Things are still closed, but there's no new updates about the coronavirus. So that's when we're really going to struggle with stories because last week it was this is all new. This week was these are changes that are being made. I don't know what's going to happen next week, but it's if the coronavirus gets old in terms of what people are doing, but things are still closed. You can't go and talk to city officials. You can't go and go to schools. So it's what are we going to talk about? So I think it's
a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting trying to figure out what's going to happen next week with stories. I think that's when we're going to really start having trouble with this. But so far it hasn't been that bad.
Well, we're looking forward to see what stories you can come up with.
We'll see.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
I'm trying to think if there's anything else we're doing or I think what's a little different is that we don't have this makes you realize that sometimes you don't have all of the equipment that you need. We are short when it comes to a wireless Wi-Fi. So I was told oh, it's okay, just go home and edit from home. But last week I was doing a story an hour away and I was like, oh, okay, I'll just go to a cafe. And then all those places started closing and I couldn't go in. So I was like, oh my God, how am I going to get Wi-Fi? So I ended up getting some kind of device, but I think this also is making us get a little bit more creative about what we can do, and where we can go for stuff, what places have bathrooms that are open. We figured out that you can go to hotels and you can use their bathroom to curl your hair and get ready for your shot, or different ways of setting up your camera. So you're recording from your laptop, but you have your camera behind you, and you can also set up your phone. So you have like 3 different shots. So I think it's, this time also is teaching us how to be a little bit more creative with our stuff. Like, we're very limited in what we can do. So how do we make the best of it? How do we set up our shots to make it, more creative? How do we like figure out what places are open for us to charge our phones or, use the bathroom or things like that. So this is also an eye-opening time where you can like try to get a little bit more creative, and even joining Facebook groups. Like, there's a group called Jane, which is, for like reporters, women who do everything themselves. And you get a lot of ideas from stories, and you have like a lot of things like that. Like, hey, if you didn't know this, like hotels are letting you in, or like, you can go to this place to charge your phone or your laptop. So yeah, I think that's also been kind of very helpful during this time.
Yeah, that's really nice. Especially, it has been a trying time, but it definitely is a good time to be innovative with technology and figure out different ways to use it for sure that we haven't had to do in the past. As
Yeah.
much, so.
Yeah, I mean, like, I have never used Zoom. So, like, when you were Zoom, I was like, honestly, I've never used it. I've only used, like, Skype, FaceTime, and, like, Facebook video is what I've been using a lot for, like, people that don't have iPhones. I've been doing a lot of Facebook video calls, which I've done anyway, but also trying to figure out, like, how to get all this footage on my work laptop, because I'm using my personal one right now, and, like, Mac laptops are great because, like, if I needed to record this conversation, I can just use, like, the QuickTime player and, like, screen record it. But the file itself is, like, way too big for my editing software. So it's also, like, okay, how do I transfer all this over onto, like, software that's not made for this? So that's been really hard to try to figure it out, because like our laptops are always going to be way more advanced than the ones that they give you at your job. I don't think they'll ever give you a Mac laptop. So I have like this laptop that I swear is like from the 90s, and it's hard to kind of transfer all these files over. So I think like using your camera as much as you can will definitely help. I think like now I need to start recording my interviews with my camera while also screen recording them and seeing like which one works best. So it's just things like that, trying to figure out like what makes sense, what is just going to give me a harder time, and
just
stuff.
Learning and adjusting to different things and stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Paola, for taking the time to talk to me and for all the work that you're doing to keep us informed and safe. And thank all of you for watching this episode of Reporting from the Frontline of the Pandemic. Again, I was talking to Paola Tristan Arruda, a news reporter at Live 5 News in Charleston, South Carolina. And I'm Victoria Gonzalez.